Hi, can everyone hear me? Thank you so much for coming today and participating in 1455's second annual Summer Literary Festival. We hope you'll help us spread awareness by sharing your impressions via social media, liking the 1455 Facebook page, and signing up for our newsletter. We also hope that you will dig deeper into the work of our authors. Their books are available for purchase via the links on the agenda page on the LitFest website, and all purchases will be shipped directly to your door. We're delighted to be partnering with the Potter's House on book sales this year. They're a nonprofit bookstore and cafe and event space in DC with a deep history of social justice and community building. And you can learn more about their work at pottershousedc.org. So this is Motherhood and the Written Word, and I'm thrilled to have everyone here today and to have these incredible panelists. We're going to start with each of them doing a quick little reading related to that, and then we'll get into questions. And finally, we're going to have your questions. We'll hopefully have time at the end, and we're going to ask you to use the Q&A to type up your questions, and then we can get to as many of those as possible. So let's begin with Kara Oakleaf. Her work has appeared in Matchbook, Smoke Long Literary, Wigleaf, Booth, Pithead Chapel, and elsewhere. Her fiction has been selected for Best Small Fictions and the Wigleaf Top 50 and appears in the Bloomsbury Anthology Short Form Creative Writing. She earned her MFA at George Mason University, where she now teaches writing and literature and directs the Fall for Book Literary Festival. Kara, thank you.
Hi, thanks, Hannah. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I'm going to read I'm primarily a fiction writer. I'm going to read a short story. This is called The Magician. Aaron, our little magician, spends his days pulling white rabbits from his top hat, and they scatter across the house. When my husband and I try to catch them, the magician waves his wand and they disappear into smoke, slipping through our fingers. Sometimes I catch one in the cupboard, gnawing through a box of Cheerios. Aaron flicks his wrist and this one disappears too, but there are always fine white hairs tangled in the cereal, and we have to throw the whole box away. The little magician screams when he can't have his usual breakfast. It feels like we've always known. When he was a few months old, I slipped into his room during a nap, just to watch him sleep, and found the small black top hat he'd conjured for himself, covering his face. I ran to him and pulled the hat away, but Aaron was still breathing easily, those tiny pauses between his baby breaths, in and out. The hat landed in the corner of the crib, and the first tiny white rabbit, the size of a cotton ball, hopped out and across the mattress. It sniffed at Aaron's fingertips, still curled into fists in his sleep. On his 3rd birthday, he lifted his arms to me for a hug, and when I held him close, he put his finger in my ear, and I could feel something thick and heavy that muted the sound. Aaron pulled out 3 coins. 3 like me, he sang, dropping the coins into my palm. They were coppery and dense as stone, etched with an ancient, forgotten language that Jake and I still can't identify. I don't know how he does it, but they were as real as anything. I could feel those coins behind the folds of my own ear, like they'd always been a part of me, but I'd somehow missed them. It's strange how he's made my own body a place I don't understand, and leaves me wondering how I'm connected to something so foreign, how all this magic found its way under my skin. Once, he wrapped himself in his silk cape and spun around, reciting hushed words to himself, and then he was gone. For just a second, his cape hung in the air, fanned out like he'd grown wings, and I almost expected him to fly. Then the cape dropped, liquid spilling into a puddle on the floor. His top hat spun on its rim before settling. I lifted the cape, expecting to find a hole in the floor, or Aaron standing up grinning, but there was nothing, only the bare hardwood and heat rising from it like an iron. My husband and I screamed for him, ran through the house calling his name and waving the wand he'd left behind like it might perform some magic for us too, but it doesn't recognize our fingers. Jake picked up the phone to call the police, but I asked what we could tell them, and he hung up after the first ring. We found Aaron 20 minutes later, sitting naked and muddied and shivering under our back porch. He looked at us like a wild animal when we picked him up. Inside, Jake ran a bath, and Aaron's eyes came back into focus as we poured water over his back. He splashed and made waves that rose over the edge of the tub and hung there for a second before crashing down into his own little ocean, where his toy boat glided across the surface of the water, pushed by a wind we couldn't see or feel. Some nights, we string a clothesline across the living room and drape a bedsheet over it to make a curtain. The magician steps out from behind and performs for us, and for a few minutes, we pretend it's all just a trick. Aaron pulls colored scarves from his sleeves, and the rabbits jump from his hat and scamper at his feet. He connects and pulls apart a row of brass rings, shiny and gleaming as our wedding rings on the day we got married, and every show begins with "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls," even though our magician is, and will always be, the only child in our house. Then there's bedtime, and we have this. The magician is a good sleeper. His days of performing exhaust him, and Aaron drifts off quickly while I sit in the rocker, and Jake cleans up downstairs, sweeping rabbit droppings into one of the magician's silk scarves. He drapes the string of brass rings, still connected, over the arm of the couch like a necklace. We don't know how to pull them apart. I cover Aaron with his cape, black on one side and a brilliant scarlet on the other, and know he'll sleep all night. Before I leave the room, I stare at him for long minutes. Hair swept across his forehead, those eyelashes making shadows on his cheeks in the glow of the nightlight. I listen to him breathe, listen to the silence between each breath, and in each of those spaces, I hear the silence of the 6 years that came before him. The waiting and the hoping and the disappointment. The needles in my skin and the gentle voices of doctors with no good news. And finally, the month we gave up. We hardly understood it when he appeared on the ultrasound screen, a thin white line pulsing, disappearing into the black static and then emerging again, like he himself was a trick. Even now, years later, we still wonder to ourselves how it happened, if Aaron knows how he did it. Even if he does, we know he'll never tell us. In the dark of his room, I hold my own breath between each of his, like I'm still afraid the magic might fade, but Aaron's breaths keep coming, in and out. The cape rises with his chest, a movement that's constant and steady and easy to believe in. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kara. Next, we're going to hear from Seema. Seema Reza is the author of the poetry collection, A Constellation of Half-Lives, and the memoir, When the World Breaks Open. Seema has led writing workshops within correctional facilities, military and civilian hospitals, elementary and secondary schools, and universities. She is the CEO of Community Building Artworks, and Reza's work with veterans is featured in the 2018 HBO documentary, We Are Not Done Yet. An alumnus of Goddard College and VONA, V-O-N-A, I hope I said that right. She has had writing online and in print in McSweeney's, the LA Review, the Feminist Wire, the Offing, and Entropy, among others. Case studies from her work with military populations have appeared in Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and Related Diseases in Combat Veterans. She has performed across the country at universities, theaters, festivals, bookstores, conferences, and one fine mattress shop. Seema.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here in this wonderful company. I'm going to read a section of an essay that sort of, I'll start sort of in the middle of it. And it's right after I find out that my father has died and I have to figure out how to tell my kids, who are then 11 and 6. I pick the kids up from school early, before lunchtime. They come out of their classrooms bewildered, shielding their eyes from the sun with their lunchboxes. The sun is beating down viciously already. The humidity in the air makes everything heavy. I steady myself, make my eyes bright. I smile and tell them we're going to the riverside for a picnic. They are thrilled. Is it a special occasion? Were we especially good? You're always good, I respond. This is not at all true, and they shift uncomfortably in the back seat. Well, this has nothing to do with that. I just wanted to talk to you by the river. They are satisfied by this, and the conversation wanders as we snake along the hilly roads that lead to the park. We pack the picnic into a cloth shopping bag pulled from the trunk and begin the familiar hike across the bridge, over the C&O Canal, and through the entrance into the wooded trail that follows the Potomac River. Here in the shade, it is easier to breathe. Sam spots a snake and we bend over to peer at it, our heads close. I put my hands gently on their small backs, feel their spines protruding through their damp t-shirts. They are so fragile, so human and alive. We continue to hike. You know, I always come here when I'm sad. It makes me feel good to be in nature and feel small and a part of something bigger than my own life. Sam turns to look at me quizzically, one eyebrow raised. He quickly faces forward and continues, faster now. Zaki says, yes, nature, and especially trees, are much bigger than you. You are kind of small for an adult. The trail is broken by tree roots and rocks, and Zaki is a distracted hiker who trips often. Sam is far ahead of us. Let's go to our spot and see how high the river is right now, I call to him. Can you remember where the entrance is? He nods and slows a little. When he gets to the entrance to the little side path that will take us to the river, he waits. The canopy of trees stops rather abruptly at this point, replaced by tall grasses and thorny bushes. The drone of water-dwelling insects is louder, and the river is just a few yards away, making its own music. We leave the dim, sheltered path for harsh, unfettered openness, making our way to the water's edge. It hasn't rained in a few weeks and the water level is low. We sit on the large, smooth boulders closest to the water, and I pass Sam his sandwich packed in wax paper and unwrap Zaki's before handing it to him. Sam holds his sandwich, still wrapped, and looks at me expectantly. I close my eyes for a moment and then open them again. I look at Sam. His chin is starting to tremble. He can feel the bad news coming. This is the last moment of his childhood. Nani called me this morning. No, not Nana, not Nana. Sam's face has crumpled, tears mingle with the sweat on his face. Zaki is sitting on the rock, observing. His face is mostly obscured by the giant turkey sandwich between his hands. He looks from Sam to me and back again. Sam returns his sandwich to me, takes a deep breath, crosses his arms. What happened? We're not sure. He went swimming, they were on vacation, and we think he might have had a heart attack while he was in the water. I want to go home, right now, Sam says, ignoring my outstretched arms and turning toward the path. Zaki hands me his sandwich and stands up too. I drop it all back into the bag and follow behind them. You know, Sam, Zaki says, scrambling up behind his brother, these things happen all the time to lots of people. Even Max the dog, our neighbor, died. Shut up, Zaki, Sam growls back, picking up his pace. I put my hand on Zaki's shoulder and give him some Gatorade to drink. You're right, these things do happen a lot. Sam is further up the path now, and Zaki wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. It should be that when you die, you're only dead for a day and then you come back. That would be better. Yes, it would be. We continue up the path and find Sam squatting beside a tree. He holds his hand up to stop us as we approach. He puts a finger over his lips and then motions for us to proceed. It's a frog, he whispers. The little brown frog is blinking at the base of a tree, each breath making its tiny body quiver. Zaki leans forward, hands on his knees, and when he can no longer resist, he reaches a hand out to touch the frog. It hops away, navigating fallen leaves bigger than itself. We continue along in silence. Once in a while, Sam points to something beautiful as he passes it, but does not wait for us to examine it with him. He walks steadily on. When we emerge from the trail onto the towpath, Sam is skipping rocks in the canal. The towpath is gravel, so there are plenty of rocks to throw. In the interest of conservation, I usually place a limit on this exercise. Surely the gravel comes from somewhere and must be replaced. Today, I sit cross-legged on the path and allow them both to throw rock after rock into the water, watching the circles ripple outward as the rocks sink. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Seema. Thank you. And our last panelist to read is Tyrese. Tyrese L. Coleman is the author of the collection How to Sit, a 2019 PEN Open Book Award finalist published with Mason Jar Press in 2018. Writer, wife, mother, attorney, and writing instructor, she is a contributing editor at Split Lip magazine. Her essays and stories have appeared in several publications, including Black Warrior Review, Literary Hub, The Rumpus, and the Kenyon Review, and noted in Best American Essays. She is an alumni of the writing program at Johns Hopkins University. Find her at tyresecoleman.com or on Twitter at Tyla, and I'm going to do this. I'm just going to spell it Tylacheelleco. Tyrese, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm still waking up, and I apologize for that. I'm going to read the last portion of an essay from my book, How to Sit. It's about my birth experience and my children being in the NICU. And I am certain one of them is going to walk in at any moment because I can hear them wandering around the hallways behind me. So FYI, you've been forewarned. But this essay is called B-Day. 81 days, 11 weeks and 4 days, approximately 3 months. That's how long we waited. The NICU is full of people waiting. There are babies waiting to feed, waiting for surgery, waiting for oxygen, waiting for medicine, waiting to see their parents, waiting to be held, some wait to be loved. There was a teenage couple in our area of the NICU whose baby was 3 pounds of chocolate sweetness. When the nurses dressed her in pink, she looked like a hostess snowball. The couple was hardly ever there to see her. I overheard one nurse say the little girl was going to think she was her mama. There were a few evenings when I could see them there, slouching in plastic chairs, never touching, never speaking to the child. I wanted to steal that baby, take her to a friend, someone I knew whose maternal clock had run out of batteries, but could still feel the hands of time moving inside of her. The hospital staff called the kids more than once with the happy news, "Come pick up your baby. She's ready to go home." The parents didn't show up right away. When they did, they packed their baby's luggage, her heart rate and oxygen monitors, and disappeared. In the NICU, there are parents waiting to take their babies home. Some just wait hours, some wait days, weeks, months. Many wait forever. I worked while the boys were in the hospital, choosing to use my medical leave for when they came home. But there were days where I would take off and spend hours there, sitting in the terrible wooden rocker between their isolates, staring at them as I desperately milked my breasts with the machine like an industrial farm cow, willing myself to produce something natural while surrounded by all the artificial. I left NICU room B and took a lunch I bought with me down to the hospital lobby to eat. I happened to meet that woman from the wheelchair train, the one with the long fingernails. She had had twins too, a boy and a girl. She delivered at 28 weeks, a goal I once had for myself. Her daughter died in utero, also suffering from placental insufficiency. We exchanged email addresses, but she never wrote me back. Doctors and nurses wait, their anticipation measured in the dipping numbers of a heart rate, the increasing hum of a ventilator, or the progressive beating of a pulse oxygen machine. Langston, baby B, was small. The diminished blood flow had stopped his growth. He was 1 pound, 3 ounces at birth, the average size of a 23-weeker, the size of a baby 1 week too early to be deemed that magical word, viable. Yet Langston was the calm one. He was small, but he had hardly any problems. He breathed well, he gained weight, he learned to suck and swallow. He was our Mr. Incredible. But James, my baby A, was probably the most like me. In his hard-headedness, he took on every stereotypical preemie complication with the rebellion of a teenager. He was the average-sized one, weighing 1 pound, 13 ounces at birth, normal for a 25-weeker. He should have been the easier patient, but as the nurses and doctors used to say, you can't trust a preemie. James had heart surgery. A titanium clip smaller than the size of a pencil eraser was permanently placed inside his chest to close one of his blood vessels. James had eye surgery. A man wearing glasses used a laser to blast abnormal cells from inside my baby's eyes so that he didn't suffer from the same disease that blinded Stevie Wonder. But worse than all of that, James had an infection. The doctors again prepared us, showing us x-ray images of his chest, his lungs resembling a tree covered by clouds of locusts. James had necrotizing enterocolitis, a disease that is one of the leading causes of death among babies in the NICU. If they don't die, they receive surgery. Their intestines are removed. Feeding tubes are inserted into and attached onto their bellies, and they face a lifetime of long-term disabilities. That was my baby's possible future. All I thought, because I couldn't wait to take care of myself. After praying one night in the hospital's chapel, my husband and I went home. I lay in my bed, the scene of the original crime, still smelling the acetone scent of antiseptic foam coating my hands. I always clean my hands before I touch them because I was unclean. I couldn't wash away my guilt because there's no worse punishment for sin than guilt. Guilt crushes you, paralyzes you, and makes you see who you really are. Even when James recovered with medication alone, I apologize. I didn't take that to mean that God had answered my prayers or that he forgave me as I had before. The guilt held me back from being happy. It replaced my confidence with fear. Now my restless nights were spent facing the white tube of light from my cell phone, looking into the future. My internet searches, cerebral palsy and premature babies, 25-weeker autism, developmental delays. I had imagined, as some expecting parents do, my boys' future. My husband and I talked about teaching them to ice skate at 2, how cute they would be pushing the little blue buckets across the ice with puffy gloved hands and red cold pinched cheeks. We talked about how they would be handsome and popular. I imagined hating anyone who would try to date my sons, yet feeling overwhelmed with joy and pride when they settle down and have children. We talked about their education and talents. It was inevitable that our sons would be intellectuals, brain surgeons, or musical virtuosos. We talked about sports. My husband forbidding football and me not keen on being an ice hockey mom, sitting on cold bleachers, yelling at other 5 or 10-year-olds, trying to bully my boys. But I would do it. I would scream and shout and cheer on my talented, athletic, good-looking, successful, intelligent, able-bodied children with all the vigor of a woman ignorant in her privileged bliss. Now I wonder if they would ever even walk. Would they even talk? Did I take away that future? Guilt is a bully holding your arm as you try to run. Both of my sons got bigger. They both passed their car seat tests. They came home with oxygen but were tube-free in a mere 2 weeks. They gained even more weight at home, removed from the stress and the noise of the NICU. They thrived, are thriving, and yet one night after we had brought them home, I became hysterical. I held on to James, his cheek pressed against my chest, sweaty. My husband reached for him and I felt like running. I was going to run the hell out of there with him. No one was going to take my baby. He was mine. He was alive. I had him. I screamed and I cried, and I don't even remember what for or why, but I was going to hurt my husband if he tried to take my baby. When I calmed down, my husband took him from me and told me to rest. I lay down in my bed, repulsed, never wanting to touch myself again. Whoever came up with the cliche, time heals all wounds, is an asshole. Time doesn't heal all wounds. It may dull the pain of some of them, help make the scabbing, the healing process more tolerable. It may help you forget that you were even injured for a moment, but time doesn't heal everything. Time, waiting, anticipating, wondering, hoping can make things worse. And when those unhealed wounds inevitably reopen, you feel all the pain again. As they reach almost 26 months, I have 2 healthy, active, and playful toddlers, but I am unable to rejoice in the small victories, always wondering when the next catastrophe is going to take place. Langston isn't talking. His vocabulary is limited to dada and nana. I find it hard to believe my husband when he tells me that the boy said, "hey," this morning, or that he pointed to the dog in a book thinking it's my husband who just can't face reality. He doesn't know that God hasn't forgiven me. All I can do now is wait for whatever is coming next, and in between, try to live. So yes, even after having them, even after V-Day, I am still waiting for viability, my own. Patience has never been my thing. I struggle with graciously accepting delays.
Thank you, Tyrese. So we're going to move into the questions now. And for all the people listening and watching, feel free to type questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to those when we are finished with it. We only have a few that we're going to sort of dive into and have a conversation. And I'm not sure in terms of a panel on Zoom if the best thing is to, I think I'm going to try to just let us sort of naturally converse, but if it ends up being difficult, then we could just go one at a time. Does that sound good with our panelists? Good. Okay. So to start us off, I'd like to ask, what role does being a mother play in your writing in terms of what you write or don't write, and even how you get anything done, particularly now, juggling kids and work and your craft? So who would like to begin with that?
I can start. So for me, I have been trying to fit writing in, basically fit it in where I can get it in. A lot of that means waking up super early. Before the pandemic, I was a 5 a.m.er, and then also a late night writer. Well, not necessarily late night, after they go to bed. And those things still exist for me. So if I can wake up early, I will wake up early, try and move my body a little bit, and then get to writing or researching. But I've noticed that for whatever reason, I don't want to wake up early as much anymore. I want to sleep. So I am naturally a morning person, and I've sort of switched off into a night person now because I still feel like I have to get writing done. It's not something that I am willing to just kind of chuck to the side. So I've been forcing myself to kind of change who I am in order to facilitate my ability to take care of this. In terms of subject matter, it plays a huge part, but I am very tight on what I do write about. I don't write about my children's experiences. I write about my own experiences, and I'm
Are you still there? I lost Tyrese. Can I?
Her internet is slightly
You
off
did
today.
say that. All right.
I'll pop in.
Please do.
Yes. Good. Thank you.
For me, my children are teenagers. My younger one's a teenager. My older one's 20. So like, I have till 3 o'clock in the afternoon before anybody's awake here. And yeah, the morning is great. But there's something, if there's something big happening with the boys, it doesn't matter what I sat down to write, like that sucks my psychic energy. I have to write that thing first. And even when they're like, so I have half custody, so they're here sometimes and they're with their dad at other times. But when they're here, there's like a part of me that's like, is somebody hungry somewhere in this house? And so it's that sort of like, I think they take up a lot of my mental space and my emotional space in some really great ways, right? Like it deepens, I get to see the world like as a 20-year-old and a 14-year-old again. But also then I can't sometimes focus on my own. So just like, there's always this balance. I think that's probably true whatever your work is. If you're a parent, like there's like a part of you that's always maybe like you feel like you're leasing yourself from them and figuring out that balance. Like when I figure it out, I think I'll get the Nobel Prize, but But for now, it's that like, okay, fine, I have to write this, 3 paragraphs about what's happening with the boys, and then get to the essay I'm trying to write about X or Y other thing. So that's how I sort of navigate the psychic space. Tyrese is back.
Oh, good. One of the things that I've noticed I do a lot more since I've had kids is I use the Notes app in my phone. I am constantly writing like a single line down and coming back to it much later. I'm more of a like late night writer than an early morning writer. I've tried the early morning thing sometimes when my kids happen to be in a good cycle of sleeping normal hours, but that doesn't always happen. One other thing I noticed when I first had kids is my writing got a lot shorter. I used to write much longer short stories, and almost everything I write now are these like flash fictions, really, really short things. If I have to write something longer or I'm working on a bigger project, I almost have to get away. Like I tend to get so much more work done on big projects if I can go away for a weekend or a week or something like that. That's really as long as I can kind of handle being away from my kids when they're still young. And now that I have a baby, that's kind of out the window for a little while. But when she's older, I'm really looking forward to doing like that 1 week away where I'm just locking myself up in a room and writing.
That idea that Seema mentioned, leasing out ourselves, I've never heard that before, but it's, to me, that really strikes home of that that space of you that even when you are away for the weekend, I try to do that too, though it's very hard right now, of course. Like there's always a part of you that is a parent. There's always a part of you that is like writing, and that's seeping in even when you are actively writing, because you're not entirely yourself. So that's a really, really interesting idea that now is going to go in my head a lot. Where is the line for you in terms of privacy and telling your stories? And Tyrese sort of touched on this, and I think we all think about this a lot. Telling your stories versus your child or children's stories. Where is that? Because our stories are so often intrinsically intertwined with our children's stories, right? And especially when we're talking fiction, I think it might be a little easier, and that's why I think some of us go to fiction, is because we have a little more freedom. But in terms of nonfiction, memoir, autobiographical poetry or prose poetry, or even fiction, where is that line and how do you navigate it? I think you want to start with Tyrese in case your internet goes out again. We want to have you.
I'm so sorry, you guys. Comcast is the worst. So I like I was trying to say before, I've been very careful in making sure I don't overstep and try and pretend like I understand what's going on in their bodies when I am not in their bodies. And so that is really something I've been cognizant of, especially because my son is autistic, and that's a world that I am not a part of. I'm not in his mind. So I've been very careful to just remain as close to my own experience when it comes to talking about parenting, and choosing to only relate the things and that are related to my feelings, my actions, and how I'm taking care of the situation. And I also, a lot of my writing is very, very personal in the sense that I don't really hold anything back. If you read my book, you will know what V-Day actually is about. And so I already feel like when they get older, they're gonna know way too much about their mother. And I don't want them to also have some kind of impression that I had, some ideas about them that weren't just my own personal feelings when they get older as well. So I'm just kind of thinking about the future, what information will be about me that's out there in the world, and what their impressions might be. So yeah, it's something that I am very careful about.
Yeah, like Tyrese, my work is like, I don't hold anything back on the page. And so it's, and then figuring out that line of, especially as they get older. With the memoir, When the World Breaks Open, it is about the dissolution of my dysfunctional marriage to their dad. So a lot of it is this overlap, and we have a deal, although who knows whether deals hold, but I have a deal with my sons that like, you can read it once you're 25, when you can make, your dad doesn't have this, he doesn't have this particular privilege of being able to put the words on the page and tell the story, his side of the story. So get to know him now and then see what you think. But with like older things, as they've gotten older, I run stuff by them. If they appear big in a piece that I'm gonna put out, I'll like email it to my son and be like, yo, are you okay with this? There was an essay that was in the Washington Post recently that was like, or not recently, but that was about teaching in a correctional facility and also feeling worried about my son's grades. And so I like, before I did anything with it, I emailed it to him and was like, hey, what do you think of it? And as it's this tricky thing, right? Like, I don't want their idea of who they can be to be limited by what they thought my idea of who they would be is. And like, I don't think it's perfect. I go to a lot of open mics. If they go to open mics, they'll write about how I effed up. I'm sure that's like, I think that's like I do about my mom. But I do try to be as err on the side of caution and, run it by them and be as thoughtful about it as possible, knowing that I'll make mistakes.
I think what Tyrese said about making it about your own experience is what I found to be true. The couple times I ventured into nonfiction, I realized that I'm writing so much about my own experience as a mother, and there's very little that's specific about my daughter in any of it. One minor thing that I'm also aware of is my kids have a different last name than me. So if I was ever to write anything that they really, really wanted to distance themselves from, that's like a little safety net for them. My oldest daughter is 6, so they're still a little bit too young to really talk about the things that I'm writing. But I think that's something I'll have to be aware of as they get older and think about a little bit more about what it is that they're comfortable with having out there about themselves. It feels to me very similar to anything that you write about family. The couple times I've written something about my own family, it's something that I run it by my mom and my sisters and say, are you guys comfortable with me, putting something like this out there? And fortunately, I've been pretty lucky in that so far that they're okay with it.
Thank you. And so that sort of answered a question that somebody in the audience had asked as well, and that I was going to bring up, but I think we've sort of touched on it. Do your kids read your work, or will they read it in the future? I know I often will talk to my kids about grown-up work and how work is for at a certain age is when it's the time to read it, even if it wasn't my work, it was somebody else's. At 10 years old, you don't read the same thing necessarily that you would read when you're 18 or 25, like Seema said. I think that's such an interesting dynamic that all parent writers and anyone who writes memoir or creative nonfiction comes into, for sure. Everyone on this panel has kids of different ages, from little tiny babies up to adults. So this question is obviously going to be very different for each of us, but as your children have gotten older, either from newborn to toddlerhood or from tween, teen to adult, how or has that impacted how you write about families and parenting? And I don't just mean as parenting essays or anything, but just in general, how you view motherhood in the literary form. How does that changing of yourself as a mom inject itself into your writing as your kids get older?
So just briefly, I think I touched on it a little bit, but I think as my kids get older and they become individuals, I'm beginning to see like, oh, they would write about that about me. Like that I messed up there. I think I feel kinder towards my mom and in my writing. Just like I think that has just definitely changed. Like just like to be able to see the mother of an adult as me, that's been a major shift, just identity.
So my kids are 7, and How to Sit was primarily written when they were babies. And so a lot of the pieces in there that are related to parenting or being a mother come from a very emotional, very guilt-ridden, very uh, just raw place. And I think I've transitioned from that place because I feel like that's the setting for the mother of babies, the mother of toddlers, right? Especially going through what we went through, which was, you know, they were born at 25 weeks. So I had a lot of feelings around that. And I'm the type of writer who writes in the moment, whether it's good or bad. I use writing to parse out my emotions about things. And then, oh my God, years later or months later, I look at it like, oh, why in the world did I put that down on paper and let other people read it? Like, I should have really processed this before I put it out there. But I am actually glad that it's, you know, it has documented sort of the feelings of what it's like to go through something like that. So I would say that, you know, I'm definitely not anywhere near the place where my kids are grown and I can like have some distance from all of this. But I do feel as though I have distance from the sense of guilt and the sense of, you know, just extreme worry about them. You know, I've come to a place where I've just kind of accepted what is going to happen from now on, and decided that I'm just going to deal with whatever comes next. So, and I think that creates a totally different writing tone when I pick up when I pick up my pen or I sit at my desk to write. There's a different tone to what I'm putting forward. It's not as intense, although some of it is still very intense, but it's not as, this is dire, this is going to be the end of it all, this is going to be the worst thing ever. Now I feel like I can have a little bit more perspective, but who knows? I mean, if something, you know, more emotional was to happen and those feelings were to come back, I'd probably have a totally different tone as well. So I'm a very, you know, moment by moment kind of person, but I think my writing about motherhood and writing about my children has matured along with them in a lot of ways.
And my kids are six years old and 5 months. So it's kind of one of those things that's like, I'll let you know how it changes as they get older and older. But one thing I know I've noticed as somebody who writes fiction is it's completely changed the way I approach any characters in my work who are parents themselves. I can look at something that I wrote prior to having my first daughter, and realize that I would completely change the way that I portrayed a particular character who was a mother. And it's been really interesting to see that perspective switch. And hopefully it's something that's made my writing of those kind of characters a lot richer.
Thank you all. In a real different direction, because I wanted to make sure we got to it before the end of our session, I recently read a short story of mine at an event that painted motherhood in a less flattering light. Sometimes it's really fun to write horror. It's really fun to write a fantasy where you just abandon your children forever. You know, these kind of things, right? Fiction or nonfiction. and when I read that, I found that some of my audience was really displeased. Some of my readers had thoughts about what a terrible mother I was, or how I shouldn't be writing that way when I have written parenting essays that were so important, blah, 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 or whatever. So, and I even found that there was an angry response. And so I was wondering how you all handle expectations from any type of reader that others put on your writing, particularly when it comes to parenting pieces, family related stuff, or fiction about parenting. Do I need to call on somebody? Kara, you're up.
That's an interesting question. That's not an experience that I've had before. And maybe that is just kind of one of the benefits of writing mostly fiction, is you can always separate yourself in a way that you can't necessarily do with nonfiction. I think the biggest thought I would have with that is not so much a concern about what the general audience is going to think, but how you keep that work separate from your children until they're old enough to kind of appreciate and understand it. The audience reaction, I imagine, is a really difficult thing to deal with when you're writing nonfiction, because it is something that's so personal.
I am the type of writer who really doesn't care if people get mad at me. I tend to just do my thing. And I think I've had people write entire takedown pieces of things that I have written, not necessarily related to motherhood, but related to other topics. And to me, that's the moment where, as a writer, you have arrived. When people take the time to like slam you and write entire pieces about you. So I think that I don't know. In my opinion, I think it's kind of a good thing to be criticized, because it's not only good for you to think outside of your own perspective, but I think it's also good to let the rest of the reading public know that you're not going to kowtow to being a certain way just because they want you to be. So I embrace that criticism, and I would like to rather have a dialogue with those people, or not. They can always choose to just feel the way that they want to. But I like to think that there are people who still appreciate what I have to provide, regardless of the few who are angry about something.
Yeah, I'm more of the or not in terms of dialogue, for sure. Like, hey, if you wanted it different, you should write that. I think there's a lot of this pressure of the mother as the saint, which I think is part of upholding patriarchy, and this idea like not everybody's mother is a saint, your mother is a saint, so you protect your mother and treat other women however you want. And this is this like, and if we break that wall and we're like, no, I'm a mother and also like maybe sometimes a monster, and also maybe not always wanting to be around my kids and not selfless, there's this, I think people feel like some foundation is being challenged, which is nonsense. And your foundation is not challenged by what I'm writing, right? So like, one of the sort of big Kirkus review of my memoir was, well, I wonder what her kids and ex-husband would have to say about this. And I was like, you shouldn't know that it's clearly a man who wrote the review, but it was like, okay, you know, but it's that sense of like, well, you're supposed to do X or Y thing. And, you know, if people are angry, then you're probably on the right track.
Thank you. Final question, I think. And if any, I have gotten a few questions through the Q&As, but this is your sort of last chance to type something in if you're interested. In 20 years, 30 years, if your children look back at your body of work and what you're hoping to write in the future, as well as what you've written, what is a general feeling you would like them to take away from who you are as a writer, specifically in terms of when you wrote about parenting and family. I mean, obviously we're all going to write about other things as well, and we've explored, and we'll all be super famous novelists and so rich that our kids will be extremely grateful for all that hard work we did. But also, what would you like them to think about that work, especially some of the work that maybe was along that tightrope walk that you were, that wire?
I would love for my sons to read my work and not be surprised, to feel like, oh yeah, we knew this woman. This was our mom. And yeah, maybe we didn't read all of this, but like that's my work in relationship with them, is to try to have them know me fully and for me to know them fully. And that would be, to me, like the best, is if in 30 years they were to read my work and be like, oh yeah, that's our mom. Like, yeah, we know her.
I think that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever contemplated what I want them to think of me. I think I would like for them to do the same, like feel as though it's revealing something about me. And I want them to feel like I am less of some sort of icon or someone that's unreachable and more of a human being. At some point, there's a veil that comes off of your parents where they're revealed to not be, mom or dad, but they're actually a human being and a person. And I want them to read my work and see me as a human being and understand that I am definitely not perfect. And then also give them permission to also not be perfect. And so, yeah, I hope that in the future, when they do read my work, if they read my work, that it continuously reveals something about their mother that they may or may not have known.
I really did like what Seema said about, the idea that your children might recognize you in your work, because especially when they're young, there's such a divide between, this is who I am as a parent, and this is who I am in, every other aspect of my life. It feels like that part of you is just so sealed off from your kids when they're young. It has been interesting, I think, for everybody working at home through this pandemic to at least for me, notice how my older daughter is starting to pick up on things about my work that normally would just be completely separate for her. But I would hope that anything my daughters read of mine later, they see it as honest. And I think that's one of those things about pieces that are maybe difficult to read and get a negative reaction about, like you were talking about, Hannah, like there's this negative reaction if you write something negative about motherhood. But I think it is important for women to be honest about the challenges of motherhood as well. And so if your kids get to that point where they're old enough that they can know you as an adult rather than just as a mother, I would hope that's something they would be able to take away from my work too.
Thank you. And that was our final question. Thank you to our panelists. You three are incredible, and I appreciate you being here today. Please check out all of their work because you will not be disappointed. Really stunning, very, very different styles of work, all touching on parenting and beyond. Thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. Remember, all the programming here throughout this whole festival is free, so attend any other panels that you would like. We're putting each of our videos at each session on the website, and we're also going to be sending out e-surveys to make after the event, so please give your feedback. And finally, while we have endeavored to make this entire event free to everyone, it's not free to produce. So if you like what you're experiencing, and you want to help subsidize this and future events, please consider a tax-deductible donation to 1455litarts.org, because every penny helps 1455 continue providing awesome, inclusive, and free programming. Thank you again. Please, again, also go back to the website and find all of our panelists' book information so you can order. And we can also support the Potter's House DC, which is a really fantastic place to support. Thanks again for all of you for being here. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Tyrese and Kara.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Great talking with you all.
Bye-bye.